wanted to spend a little bit of time before, well, I think we should sing, actually. I'm getting off on what I think we should do. So last time we did a little bit of singing as we were heading into that common table prayer. And so now I want to do a little bit of rote teaching, and then we're going to go into the hymnal to talk about reading notes. If you missed the first part where I talked about the importance of reading notes, you'll have to watch the first session later. And again, if you need a hymnal, Pastor Peterson, the true servant leader, is willing to come around and make sure that you've got one. All right, so I'll do a little more rote learning, and then we'll go into the hymnal. Let me make sure I'm in the right key. Pum 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 pum. Yeah, right. Pum 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 pum. Right, and we already know what it is, right? Stricken, smitten, and afflicted, right? So then the next phrase, pum 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 pum. Pum 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 pum. So this is something that is in your ear already. You know how it goes, and you probably have the text memorized, maybe, or maybe you will eventually over the course of your years. One of the beauties of using a body of repertoire out of the hymnal, using the same stuff year over year, is that it teaches the congregation. It teaches us, right? And I see this in my own children, right? Serving as acolytes, that they can sing the hymns without looking at the hymnal because they've memorized these things, because they're the same ones every year. It is a true gift to their faith. So I talked earlier about using the best, and using the best stuff over and over is very good. Sometimes we want to learn something new, and that's where, people are you got to be careful about introducing new stuff because you want to make sure that it's actually really good. So let's talk about taking the old stuff, the things that we know, and making sure that our eyeballs understand what they're seeing. So can you turn to 451? So oftentimes when we're looking at a hymn, we're going to be looking at the words, right? I think in general, as we're looking at hymnody, our eyes are tracking with the text, and you're going with the melody that you already know, right? Because you've been singing it all of these years. But what happens when we have something new is that we're having trouble looking at both things at the same time. So I want to sort of take us away from the text for a moment for the sake of getting our eyes to look at the notes. So on a staff, pardon me if this is too elementary for you, but on the staff, right, we have here the soprano alto voice notes, then we have all the text, and then we have the tenor bass notes, okay? And oftentimes the organ will be playing all of them, and the congregation's just singing the melody. Unless you're in some circumstance where everybody's singing in beautiful four-part harmony. But in general, that's what we're doing, right? And sometimes your organist will choose to play different harmonizations. They will choose to do other things to help accent the text, something that will serve the music well. So for our purposes, I want everybody reading the melody, the uppermost notes of each line. Don't worry about any words, just sing it on bum, bum, bum. Here's what I want you to note. I want you to follow the notes as they go up and down. If you don't know that it's E, F sharp, G, G, A, G, F sharp, G, F, I don't really care about that. I want you to follow this melodic contour. Let's try it. 1, 2. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Very good. So as you're going, you saw really 98% of this melody is stepwise motion. That means that the notes are right next to each other. We have only a few skips. Look across and see if we can find the very first skip. When you find it, let me know. Put your hand up. Where is it?
Is that the E to G?
The E to the G, very good. Or for those who don't know their letter names, A, B, C, D, F, G, A, B, C, D, F, G, A, B, C, D, F, G. That's how musicians, we only go up to G and we start over again. It's on the third line, going from tis he, tis the long, right? The skip from that E, tis, right? So that's the first skip. It's not very big of a skip. It's only a skip of a third, right? There's three notes, E, F sharp, G, so therefore it's a third. Okay, so we got that skip. Is there another one? The next time we skip from E to G, it's at the top of the second page, the very first two notes, right? Si, sa, bum, ba, 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 bum, ba. Otherwise, everything else moves by step. Interesting other thing includes, anybody else see anything interesting about the notes that you get to sing? I mean, it's all interesting. It's pretty much the same. Right, rinse and repeat, lots of the same rhythm, lots of the same little melody. I would point out the D sharp. Sometimes you see these extra signs in music. So at the end of the very first line on the word the tree, there's that sharp there. That is a sharp, not a hashtag, despite what the kids like to say today, right? And that sharp is telling us that that's a D that is up a half step. So in music, right, we have whole steps and half steps, and there's a key signature. Sometimes there's sharp, sometimes there's flat, sometimes there's nothing, right? And that's telling us which notes get those sharps and flats. And sometimes we have what is called an accidental, meaning that it's something outside of the key signature. Something, it's not an accident, but it is something that is different. And we see it on that D sharp. So if I were to sing that with a D natural, if that wasn't there, bum 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 bum, just feels wrong, doesn't it? Right? And then what that D sharp is doing is it's creating a leading tone. It is pointing us back to the E. Bum bum bum. So that E is sort of home base for us. Now sometimes having a lowered seventh scale degree is really cool and effective and appropriate, but here that's not what we have. Other interesting things include the rhythm. So you might recall before lunch I had you tap, right? As you were singing. If we were going to tap and sing, bum 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 bum, in general, you would note that we tend to just move on every tap. Bum 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 bum. There's a spot where there are two eighth notes. Right, so if we're going to look at the rhythm, by the way, having college music students spell the word rhythm, I worry for the future. They're music majors, for goodness sake. Okay, we start with two eighth notes. Bum bum bum. So having a sense of pulse and understanding how things are moving in this hymn will help it drive. If you have no sense of pulse, you could just sing this. Stricken, smitten, and afflicted, see him die. Right, and it sort of loses the drive of the piece and helps us move. Right, having consistent pulse will help our congregations. Now, is this up to you? Generally speaking, no. This is up to your church musician to do. But as you're thinking of your own personal singing, as you're thinking of how you lead worship, and as you sing in front of the congregation, having a sense of pulse will help your congregation. If you're gonna sing, sorry, you used it Agnus Dei earlier, but what's something that just let's use the verba, right? Our Lord Jesus Christ, Our Lord Jesus Christ, on the night when he was betrayed. There is a way that it can be overly prescribed and therefore feel unnatural. There is a way when it can be so unprescribed that it feels irreverent. Our Lord Jesus Christ can feel almost like you're making a show of yourself, right? Our Lord Jesus Christ, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread. There's ways that we take pauses and stresses, and we have certain ways that we take time and move time so that the text follows a natural stress with the music follows a natural stress with the text. Does that make sense? And if you don't think about it, then you haven't given it enough consideration, I would offer. All that to say, as we're looking at notes on the page, understanding rhythm and a concept of pulse is important for you, right? Even though you might not be in charge of setting the rhythm all the time, it's important. Okay, so now that we've bummed our way through stricken and smitten, now let's sing the first verse on text. I don't know what key I'm in. I think that's good enough. Ready, go.
Stricken, smitten, and afflicted, see him dying on the tree. 'Tis the Christ by man rejected, yes, my soul, 'tis he, 'tis he. 'Tis the long expected prophet, David's son, yet David's Lord. Proofs I see sufficient of it, 'tis the true and faithful word.
You did a pretty good job of having good phrases. This is something that we sometimes struggle with, is understanding where is a line of music going. But if you look at the text, right? Now I had you looking just at the notes before. Now you're looking at the text. If you look at the text, it's really pointing towards downbeats. Stricken, smitten, and afflicted, see him dying on the tree. Right? All the downbeats have a little more emphasis, if you will. Okay? Now, if we also think about when are we going to breathe, right? One of the challenges that we can face is breath management. Earlier, I talked about taking a lower breath and using more air, but you could also use air too fast so that you finish stricken, smitten, and afflicted. See him, right? So that you're out of air and you have to breathe every other word. It's going to take away from the effect of the text. So there is a bit of having to manage how much air you're going. You're not using it too fast. Makes sense? So now, think about this opening phrase. And I wonder if we can sing, stricken, smitten, and afflicted, see him dying on the tree, without taking a breath after afflicted. Try it.
Stricken, smitten, and afflicted, see him dying on the tree.
You can do it. Now, you might have had to think differently about how much air you were using as you were doing it. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the best way to sing it. I'm just saying, in this instance, you can make a longer phrase. We tend to do 1-bar, 2-bar phrases, and sometimes we have to do 4-bar phrases, meaning 4 measures, right? So now look at the next text. 'Tis the Christ by man rejected. Look, we have some pretty strong punctuation here. I'm going to argue that you should take a lift there. 'Tis the Christ by man rejected. Yes, my soul, 'tis he, 'tis he. When you think about the text, it will tell you what you should do with the phrasing. And sometimes we don't think about the text enough, as evidenced by any time when we sing a Trinitarian stanza and for some reason there's no triangle in front of it. They just don't know to stand up anymore. because they only know to stand up if there's a triangle there. Come on, people, read the words. You got to know what to do. Okay, so enough about stricken, smitten, and afflicted. How about turn to 430? So now 430, we have some other things to think about, and we have some things that we don't have to think about. What do you notice here about My Song is Love Unknown?
No eighth notes.
Okay, there's no eighth notes. Good. Whew. Sort of. Rhythm is relative here, but yes, there are no eighth notes. We have half notes and quarter notes and dotted half notes. What else is not here that you had in stricken smitten?
Harmony.
Harmony. Now all we have is the melody line. So in some sense, this should be easier. You don't have any other notes that are distracting you. You've only got the soprano melody line. Okay? So let's go back to our bum 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 version of singing. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. So while there are no eighth notes, I would offer that actually there are. Well, there's always eighth notes hiding inside, right? And a quarter note has two eighth notes inside of it. We can sing bum 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 bum. You could sing all these subdivisions, right? But the thing to think about in this piece is the word tactus. And anybody know what is tactus? Touch, right? And it is the feel of the piece. And this piece this meter that is here, when it's metered, right? It's really giving the tactus, the feel of the piece, the touch of the piece, on the half note. The half note is getting the beat. When we did stricken, smitten, and afflicted, the quarter note got the feel. But here, the half note gets the feel. That means that those quarter notes that we have are going to sort of feel like eighth notes, right? The arranger could have easily made this the first note a quarter note and the next two notes eighth notes and a quarter note and a quarter note, right? They didn't. And actually, it's much easier to read this way. I would say that was a wise choice. But the tactus, the feel of the piece, is on the half note. My song is love unknown. My Savior's love to me. So the whole idea here is that I want you to start thinking, what is the feel of the piece? The other interesting thing about this that I might point out is that it does not have a prescribed meter, right? And that what in stricken, smitten, and afflicted, what is our meter? Do you remember? Well, it doesn't actually say it, but it's in 3/4, right? If there was going to be a time signature in front, 3 beats in the measure, right? So stricken's 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1. But here, my song is love unknown. My save. You see how, if we're going to look at the half note, we have a half note pickup to the measure. Song is love on. So there's 3 half notes inside there. Known, my say. Now there's only 2 half notes inside there. Savior's love to. Only 2 half notes in there, right? So it's shifting, and we have these groupings of 3 that are inside. It's part of what I think helps the piece keep driving forward, is that the meter shifts, but we keep going, and it's the tactus that's determining how we keep going ahead. Does that make sense? I might be speaking in Greek. Well, actually, you'd probably be okay with that. Okay, no, still, jokes aren't working today. All right, so now let's think about, what are the musical considerations of My Song is Love Unknown? We've talked about the tactus, the half note getting the beat. What about the melody itself? What do you note?
That was a good pun.
Thank you. Do you see anything?
Skip.
We've got more skips going on. Okay, right? There is a lot of still stepwise motion that happens, but we start with bum, bum. There's a skip. My song is love. Right? And now we've come back to that F sharp. F sharp, A, B, F sharp, E, D. So the another interesting thing about this is that home base for this piece is a D, the note D. You'll note that our last note of the piece is a D. Lord should take from flesh and die. That's sort of the tonic. What we will, and the key signature tells us we have two sharps. That means that it's D as home base. Bum ba 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 bum bum bum. Now you don't need to necessarily know that, aside from the fact that the way the piece starts, the piece does not start on home base, which is somewhat uncommon. It starts on the third note of the scale, and that is worthy of your consideration here, right? If this is how this is where the key rests for the piece, but you're going to start on my. Your eye might need to figure that out, and more specifically, your ear. Earlier, I was talking about that if you're having trouble in singing parts of the liturgy, it might be your ear that is the problem. You have heard something incorrectly. You're not hearing how your voice is matching, or in some cases, not matching, the notes that you're receiving from the organ or the congregation. I'll tell a brief anecdote about no one who is in the room, right? But there was some psalmody being sung responsively, right, with the congregation. And the person who was, the pastor who was leading, did not catch that the reciting tone that we were singing was the same reciting tone on part A of the psalm as on part B of the tone. And so they were trying to sing one note here and one note here, but really it was the same note. And so it threw off the whole second half of the psalmody. But the congregation knew what was going on, and the congregation had a good sense of how the tone was supposed to go. So the congregation, it wasn't Peterson, it wasn't Peters. The congregation fixed it, and eventually this unnamed pastor figured it out. It wasn't Freeze either. They figured it out, that they figured out the reciting tone was the same, and then they changed and adjusted. I know, a Lutheran pastor changing, crazy. So, but sometimes it's important for our eye to see where things are in the key, and to know and to see these skips and steps and understand sort of how that works. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Jonathan, this is all well and good, but I can see that skip on my song, and I can't tell you, I see that there's a skip there, but I can't tell you what that skip sounds like until you sing it for me first. Yes?
Do you know the rationale for putting the bars where they were? Weird.
Well, the bars where they are have to do with the tactus. Back to what I was saying about the feel of the piece, right? And so if you look at the phrases, right? My song is love unknown. My Savior's love to me, love to the loveless shown that they might lovely be. Right, so now I've taken that, instead of thinking of every half note, right, now I'm just showing you where those emphases come, right, and feeling those downbeats, and that's why. Now, you can find people that will argue to the nth degree about where they should go, right? Oh, I think it should be different. Just like you can find people that will argue about the pointing of psalms and how that should go, and just like you can find people that will argue about using whichever translation of Greek that you're going to use, right? You'll find different opinions underneath the sun. Yes?
So is there a more rigid bar delineation in the accompaniment edition?
That's a great question. In the accompaniment edition, I'm not an organist. I married an organist so that nobody ever asks me to play the organ. But I'm pretty sure that the accompaniment edition is the exact same as this, right? And I think for good reason, to help make sure that the organist is speaking the same language as the congregation, right? We want whatever the organist is seeing to look very similar to what the congregation is seeing. Now, they've taken away parts, right? And I think that the intent of that, maybe it was because Paul Grimm was trying to have a smaller book, I don't know. Or maybe the intent is that he doesn't want the congregation to sing in parts. I want you to sing in unison. I'm only giving you the melody line. But I think that you will be able to find other settings that will have it different, right? And an organist might choose to play a different harmonization for something, and it will look different. And it is up to that organist to ensure that it's going to match up with the hymnal. And if you're going to do a choral setting too, right? This is in a past life, I served as a choir director for a Missouri Synod congregation, and we would sing some choral stanzas and concertatos of hymns. And there are some publishers, Morningstar, that they try to be pan whatever and make settings of music for everybody. And then what happens is that we always sort of err towards the lowest common denominator of text translations, and you fall into a trap of having something that does not actually line up with what the people see in the pews. It is a big pet peeve of mine, is that suddenly we get something that, A Mighty Fortress is the perfect example of people that are going to sing, well, we're going to do this version of A Mighty Fortress, but then we'll sing this stanza, right? And if you look at Johann Sebastian Bach, all-time greatest Lutheran of all time, right? And my favorite composer. But Bach really messed up A Mighty Fortress with his rhythmic version, right? That we tend not to do, at least we don't do it here at Redeemer, right? But you could say, I want to have the choir sing the Bach harmonization, right? But then you should have the choir sing the text that the congregation is going to see, right? Because there are differences in the text, and you have to make it otherwise it won't. No, anyway. Oh, I skirted around your question a lot. The bars are the same in the accompaniment edition. That's how it started. Sorry. Anyway, okay. Other things that you notice about My Song is Love Unknown. Oh, I know. I was going down the path of, Jonathan, I see this as a skip. I don't know how to hear it as a skip. And some of it is back to my first premise, session 1, is do it more. When we sang Stricken, Smitten, and Afflicted, you had no problem, right? And actually, you had no problem with this either. So you can see, you could sing My Song. You know what that sounds like. You've sung it several times in your life. So then you know what a skip of a third really sounds like. My Song. In the children's choir, we use do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, solfege. We use this all the time, all of the Sound of Music, but on steroids, right? And the whole premise on using all of these syllables is to treat it just like I did with the bum, bum, bum earlier, right? Is I'm going to take away all the other things that you have to worry about. And now I'm going to just use this system to get you to look at the notes and learn the intervallic relationships. What's the difference what's the space from an F to an A? Bum, bum, mi, so. That you learn what mi to so sounds like, and then you can apply it to other spots where you have that interval. Right? So that when you have that, my song, later on, you're going to sing, well, not in this hymn actually. Oh yeah, well, going from then at the end, my Savior's love to, you're coming back down the other way, right? And then you have a skip of a fourth, bum, ba, here comes the bride. Right? There's all sorts of ways that you can learn, little tricks to learn these intervals, but you're not going to learn them if you don't try. And some of it I would offer is using hymns that you know really well. So when you sing, "Oh morning star," bum 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 bum, do so mi do, a fifth, bum bum, down a third, then down another third. If you learn those intervals, when you get to another hymn that has a fifth in it, you know what it sounds like because it's the same as "Oh morn," right? So you can transfer what you're doing here and apply it elsewhere. So that's what I was going with on how do I make that third sound. Okay. We better sing something else. Turn to 483. Okay, we're still in the key of D. Bum 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 bum. So what are you seeing here? Just in this first opening phrase of "with high delight." Okay, we got a bigger range. We have bum 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 bum, a low D to a high D. So we got more notes to worry about. We got some big skips. How about look towards the 1, 2, 3, 4th bar? Bum ba bum. We have this dotted quarter eighth rhythm. The rhythm here, I think, is super interesting. So the tactus for this piece, I would say, is again the half note. Bum 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 bum. Now, you might be. I would offer that. I think probably Cantor Roining would agree. I'm looking at him. Yeah, right. But your church musician might approach it as the quarter note as the tactus. The result will be more laborious singing, in my opinion, right? But if you thought about that bum 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 bum, it just does not have the same lilt and that emotion that it really should have, right? With plodding delight is a better translation of that one, right? But then that dotted quarter eighth rhythm, if the half note is the tactus, bum 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 bum, has a very regal sense to it. And anywhere where we have it dotted with an eighth or 16th rhythm, it has that sense of majesty. And is a musical effect that composers use. Okay, so we've got that. Anything else that you're noticing? Let's sing the whole hymn on bum bum bum. Bum, ready, and go. Bum 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 bum. 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 Okay, anything else interesting?
No.
False. The last line of the first page, the third measure, has a rest, or as I insist on the children in the Fort Wayne Children's Choir calling it, a carefully notated musical science, because that's easier to say than a rest. A rest implies a little mental timeout. I'm just going to take a rest here and not do anything. But the thing is, it is very prescribed. It's an eighth, it's a quarter rest, right? Bum 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 bum, right? And again, this is catapulting us forward, because we could come to that bum 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 bum, and it loses all of the motion if you're gonna just sort of land on that end of the phrase, forever he is risen and ascends. It loses the drive. It has to keep going, right? and the rest, I talked about that sort of being like a springboard for us to keep moving ahead. So now I want you to sing this again. Now you get to sing it with the words. Isn't that so nice of me letting you sing on the text? And when we get there, I want you to put a snap or a tap if you're snapping deficient. Sometimes children are snapping deficient. On the quarter note, carefully maintained musical silence before is risen. Yeah.
So my wife and I have been attending LCMS churches in the Sheboygan area, and generally they're very liturgical, but the organists are not playing legato. They're quite staccato
Okay.
in their playing, and we contrast that to our Welsh churches. And when you don't have a rest, what we learn as organists is that you are supposed to take just a tiny bit of time off that note where a breath would be indicated or is expected.
Sure.
So can you explain why it seems like the organists are more staccato in the LCMS? Was there some kind of training that was done in the 70s or something? Or what accounts for that different way of treating the end of the phrases? Because it's more difficult to sing a more staccato playing versus legato, where the notes are tended to blend together more, especially on the organ.
I'm going to start this with a preface that I'm not an organist. I don't pretend to be an organist. I married an organist so that nobody ever asks me to be an organist.
My wife married someone who pretends to be an organist. So.
My grandfather was an organist of this vintage, right? And wherever I go, the name Busarow is a little in the Lutheran world. People associate that I must be related to Don, which is true, and that I must be an organist, which I'm not, and that I must be a composer as well, which I'm not, right? And but so people ask me a lot of things about organ. I would probably defer to Cantor Roining to help answer this, but I'll give my best answer, and you can chime in as you see fit. Okay, I think that every organist is different, and it is not necessarily something particular to the LCMS or to the Wells. Or to the ELCA or to the Presbyterians. I think that every organist is going to take it differently. It has to do with how they were trained, and I think the most important thing is having a firm sense of tactus, having a sense of pulse that drives the singing, if you are a pastor looking to have somebody help lead your congregational singing, that is the thing you should be examining, is are they leading the singing? Playing in a staccato or legato, or I think is sort of a stylistic preference. And I mean, I have preferences, but the most important thing is the breath. Is how do they treat the end of a phrase, and can the congregation sing to this? And some of that too can be trained, right? You can teach your congregation to do whatever. I'm looking at all you pastors, right? You can catechize them to do whatever, right? You can teach your congregation how to sing in a particular way. And if your organist does it in a different way than what you want, the thing is the organist eventually has trained them to sing that way, right? The most important thing is that they're singing. Now, I would offer that sometimes if an organist plays in a more detached style, which my grandfather played in a pretty detached style as I look back, I think it's to encourage singing. I think it's to encourage that the congregation should be singing with high delight, because the congregation is not going to sing with high delight, let us you. That's not what they're going to do, right? But if the organist is doing wah, 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 I don't necessarily think that there's I don't think that there's a right and a wrong here. I think that the most important thing again is leading the singing and keeping the tactus going, and keeping in mind the breath. Have I done a good enough job of dancing around your question?
Yeah, but I think another example would be that the most abused hymn in this regard is "O God from God, O light from light," the Epiphany hymn, where it's all quarter notes, and organists will play that. They will turn those ends of phrases into a half note instead of taking that quarter note and staying on time. And I think you're right. You do have to stay on time.
Yeah, and again, this comes back to the hymnal. What is the source that they're looking at? Because different hymnals treat hymns differently too, right? The Wells hymnal is gonna have some differences from the LCMS hymnal, which has differences, well, drastic differences from the ELCA hymnal, right? But I think that the decisions of the editors, they made them for a reason, and we might make different decisions. But if this is what they're looking at, then this is what we should honor, right? And so if it's quarter, right? And then that's sort of how you should treat it as the church musician. But if you're going to make changes, you sort of make those changes and you stick with those decisions so that, again, you're going to catechize the church. You're going to teach them how to sing this hymn. I just always defer to what's printed in the book. Do what's there is my general default. But yeah, we can split hairs on all sorts we can go through lots of hymns and look at that. And the other thing is that sometimes organists, again, I'm not an organist, I'm married to one, is that I'm looking at it most charitably, they're going to do the best that they can, right? Your church musician is going to want to do a good job. It's just sometimes the way that they're going to treat a hymn might differ from how you want them to treat him, in which case, I don't want to venture too much into the clergy musician dynamic, right? But you can help them learn too. You can encourage them to go to the seminary and participate in these church musician workshops where they'll be reminded of some things. And many churches we're at a point now where we have fewer organists, right? We have to raise up some more organists. And we also have to encourage the organists that we have, right? So in some instances, you might be in a position where your organist isn't leading the hymns the way you want them to, but you can't do anything about it because the organist you got is the organist you got. And if you don't have that organist, you got nobody. So I recognize sort of a fine line to walk as you're thinking on these hymns. And I might be saying things that sort of like, well, yeah, I can't do anything about that, Jonathan. Did you have anything that you wanted to add, Kent?
For you not being an organist, that was a great response.
Well, it's great. If you couldn't hear, he said that was a great response considering that I'm not an organist. So that's good. Yeah.
I'm not an organist, but I'm an accordion player.
Okay.
I'm used to time signatures, consistent bars, etc. I learned Christ is Arisen the first time at the seminary. Never heard this before. First Victimi Pascali, alternating. And this Christ our comfort, true will be all that. This jerkiness. I've never played it on the accordion, but I don't know what you call. I'm happy.
Next year.
I guess I don't even know what I'm asking at this point.
So he's talking about 459. And specifically, so this is the congregational response, right? So we could go back and forth, but for the sake of what we're talking about here, let's just stay with 459. Christ is arisen from the grave's dark prison. Right, so here we have this sort of, we're sensing the half note is the tactus, right? So let our joy rise full and free. Christ our comfort, true will be. Alleluia. The true will be is really a grouping of three. And so the issue here is that if it does cause a sense of jerkiness, if you will, right? But it only feels like that if you smack it hard. You know what I mean? That you can treat it in a sensitive manner. If you think again of the tactus, it's hard because all these notes are coming at you. Da da dee da dee da da dee da da da. There's also another sense of hemiola that's happening here, right? So hemiola is where we take the beat, the tactus, and we're confusing where the strong beat is. So here we have Christ our comfort true will be. Alleluia. So we have two groupings of three. And so what you have when you have two groupings of three next to each other is you do have a grouping where you could go, well, that's just three groupings of two. And when you do it like that, that's when it's going to feel this sort of pull. So I think the issue here would be, I would encourage you to think of them in true groupings of three. But again, this might be, I'm not looking at, we don't get to see the accompaniment version here, and I don't know, Dr. Roining, if you know what's in the hymnal there, but as a singer, as I'm looking at the melodic line, I'm going to be thinking of that grouping of three. Christ our comfort true will be. Alleluia. Make sense?
What number is this?
459.
5-9. Ah.
Do you have an answer?
Well, good answer.
Okay, good answer, considering I'm not in organ.
Considering you're not a yes.
Yeah, right.
I would say that the accompaniment book would match the bar.
The accompaniment would match the bars, right? And I think too, the sense of understanding where the emphasis comes, right? Some of it's derived from the text, right? So you can look at that. Christ our comfort true will be. How you would read it. And that will also help lead you to an answer there. Okay. I sort of have to go, but I'm gonna do one more quick thing. Because I thought it would be good for you to look at something maybe you haven't looked at as much. Can you turn to 594? At least we don't, it's not in the typical canon here at Redeemer. It might be in your congregation. I hope that it is. This is an example of a hymn that I think is newer, although it's not really that new. And I think it might be avoided because people don't do it. Do any of you do this one? Ooh, great. It maybe in other lives, in other congregations, you've done it. But this is such a great baptismal hymn. So let's look at just the notes. Bum 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 bum. So just that much. We see it's mostly all stepwise motion, right? There's three little skips on say it I. There's two. Bum 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 bum. F. That note on the first space at the bottom there is home base. Everything just sort of revolves around it. Then we sing it again. Bum 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 bum. Okay. Then bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. All right, I bummed my way through there. You bum with me. Ready and beginning, go. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Now I was tapping so that you would hear that half note as the tactus. Now look at the text. God's own child, I gladly say it. I am baptized into Christ. He, because I could not pay it, gave my full redemption price. Do I need earth's treasures many? I have one worth more than any, that brought me salvation free, lasting to eternity. It's a lovely baptismal text. that I would offer to you is something that might be newer, right? Well, not, right? 1600s, I guess that's sort of newer, depends on your perspective, right? But that the text translation here, right, that we have this Fulker text, right, and still alive. So it's, I realize, not the norm for some of us, but I think that it is worthy of your consideration, right? Don't not do this because you haven't sung it before. You might choose to not do it because it doesn't fit. You might choose to say, we have a different baptismal hymn we sing at the end of every baptism, right? Or I know a congregation that does sing this at the end of every baptism, right? As people are going back to their spots, this is what they sing. And I think that there's something beautiful about this text that is worthy of our consideration in the church. Consider what are your own deficiencies as a musician. Think of the things that you are willing to do or not willing to do, and why is it that you're not willing to do that thing? Is it because you don't have the tools to do it? Because I would offer that within this body of repertoire, you actually do have the tools. They're in here in things that you have sung, right? Is it more likely that you have an insecurity of that thing? You don't think that you can do it well. And in which case, how will you do it better? You will do it better by doing it more and trying. And when in doubt, ask for help from your church musician. They will help you. And if you don't have a church musician that will help you, God bless you. And you can talk to any church musician that you know. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one in your home parish. That would be able to help give you some resources and help. So there you go. There's your singing lesson 2.0. I hope that you sing a new song unto the Lord. All right, thank you very much.